everyone, and welcome to the latest installment of Talking Marijuana. We are your hosts. I'm Barry Kramer. I am the patient operator of California Patients Alliance. We're a GLACA-approved dispensary here in the city of Los Angeles on Melrose. Come and visit us if you're a patient.
And I'm Yami Bolaños. I'm the patient operator for Pure Life Alternative Wellness Center that's located on La Cienega for one more week. And I'm also the president and founder of GLACA, the Greater Los Angeles Collectives Alliance, setting the standard for medical marijuana in the city of Los Angeles since 2006. And in studio with us today is...
Hello, I'm Duncan, the California Director of Americans for Safe Access.
And I'm Dan Gabriel, comedian and marijuana enthusiast.
We are your hosts of Talking Marijuana, and today we are going to be speaking with Steve Elliott. He is a Washington advocate. He writes for tokesignals.com. It is a great website. You should get over there and see what Steve's talking about in Washington, and among other publications that he writes for and is involved with. Steve, welcome to the show today.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
You are our first Skype guest, so thanks for trying out the technology with us. I was saying to you before the show, we're all over 20, so, for us to deal with the technology, it took us a few shows to catch up. But we're here and so happy to be able to talk with you about the situation in Washington and what's been going on. Let's bust right into it.
Yeah.
And do you want to sum up where we are in Washington? Do you want to start with that, and then maybe we'll delve into some of the details?
You need to remember that a lot of people don't know what's going on in Washington, so you have to set it up. So
and we'll prep
understand.
it for our listeners by just saying, we know Washington is coming online in January. On January 1st, we will have legal marijuana. Not medical marijuana, legal marijuana for adult use in the state of Washington. And
everything's perfect there, right?
That would be great if everything were perfect. We are working with a developing situation here. What happened basically was the legalization of recreational marijuana was approved by voters under Initiative 502 last year in November 2012. Now, it goes to show that there is a lot of public popular support for the idea of legalization that this measure passed, because it wasn't the best written initiative in the world. A lot of us at the time had concerns that it could negatively impact safe access for patients because of some of the language in it and the way it was written. And some of those concerns are turning out to have been well-founded.
Yes.
I-502 gives control of the recreational marijuana market, implementation of marijuana legalization, to the Washington State Liquor Control Board. Now, that is fine as far as it goes, if that's the way the law is written. However, despite the fact that before the election, patients and patient advocates were told this is a separate system for medical marijuana and it won't impact safe access for patients, after the election, the legislature decided to turn medical marijuana as well as recreational marijuana over to the Liquor Control Board. The Liquor Control Board was tasked with coming up with some recommendations for bringing medical marijuana, quote unquote, into compliance with recreational marijuana rules. So the idea that was floated before the election, that these would be separate systems of access and that patient access would not be affected, was quickly abandoned after the election. And now we have the Liquor Control Board recommending that patient home growing, which they have been able to do for 15 years now since the medical marijuana law passed back in 1998, be cut out. That patient collective grows, which popularly known as dispensaries, also be cut out. That the system through which new conditions be added to the list of authorized conditions for which medical cannabis may be used be stopped from adding new conditions, that no more be added, and that patients have a statewide registry, and if they don't register on it, they won't have arrest protection. Those are the basic parts of the Liquor Control Board's recommendations. and those are the ones to which patients have expressed the biggest objections.
Well, Steve, those are terrible recommendations. I definitely agree with you. That's absolutely the wrong direction to go.
And they're wanting to tax the patients at the same level as the recreational users, correct?
Yes, and that unfortunately happens to be a rather high level.
Yeah.
According to I-502, marijuana gets taxed 25% at each of three stages, at the growing, at what they call the processing, which of course is the curing, and then at the retail level. That's 25% of each of those for, 75% total plus regular sales taxes. So that is pretty heavily taxed, more so than any other consumer product. And patients, many of them very marginal patients, of course, very limited income, since by definition under Washington's medical marijuana law, one must have a terminal or debilitating illness to qualify. Many patients are so marginal economically that they couldn't afford these store prices, and the fact that Washington's law has home growing written into the medical marijuana law has been the only thing that has been able to keep them in meds. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to afford the price of it.
That is so important. To be self-sufficient is to be able to grow your own medicine. It really is, I think, the heart of the medical cannabis movement, and it's under attack nationwide. In Arizona, we've seen efforts to roll back the ability to cultivate your own medicine, and it's coming up in California now. Our California appellate court just ruled that cities and counties can ban cultivation, even home cultivation by patients, and so this is a fight we're going to have all over the country.
I believe that home cultivation is absolutely critical
For
patients.
Absolutely, yeah.
The
I don't think we
low-income
can have a
nature
workable
of
system
so many
without it.
patients, and the fact that many patients, especially those who must use concentrates, oils of various kinds, need to grow their own to have the quantity of material that is needed for their medicine.
Their medicines.
And control over it. You can grow your own vegetables. You should be able to grow your own cannabis.
Is there a body of people or an organization of some sort or a group of people that are fighting against this? I mean, in an organized way? I mean, I read all this stuff about, you used to be able to carry 28 ounces, now you can only do 3. I mean, they have really, really slammed the patient. The patient are ones that laid the groundwork for use. I mean, right? And now, because legalization won in Washington, the patients are the victims. They're the stepping stones that were used to get to a situation where it seems like, to me, economics is the big thing. They just want the money. They don't care about anything but that.
That's a big part of what it's about is money. Steve, I hope you're familiar with a coalition campaign that ACE is a part of called Health Before Happy Hour, which is something we may be rolling out across the country. And that's one effort. What else is going on in Washington to push back on this?
There are several groups here that are pushing back on behalf of patients. I would like to see a more unified front, but of course, as you guys know, that's all
It's
hard
like
to
herding
achieve.
cats, right?
Yes, there's one group called the Cannabis Action Coalition, headed by Mr. Steve Sherritts, that has done a lot of energetic work on behalf of patients here, and I've seen them do some really good work. I think it's really important that we point out that, as you guys just did, that patient limits are also being attacked, where we have the right under the medical marijuana law to have 24 ounces, that they are recommending that we cut that down to 3 ounces. And of course, our 15 plant grow limit here, 15 plants any size, any stage, they're cutting that to 0.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So that
terrible.
is
That just
just
won't work.
unacceptable. People who have been allowed to grow their own medicine for 15 years overnight will become criminals. And it's just unacceptable to think about some of these very sick people being carried out of their homes simply for growing their own medicine.
Yeah,
So
it's
let me-
crazy, and it's a terrible path to go down for the state. There has to be a consciousness on the part of lawmakers that patients are not the same as customers, that they have special needs. And, I never want to say a bad word about legalization because I don't think anybody should go to jail for any cannabis offense. But at the same time, we also have to remember that medical cannabis patients have needs that have to be respected in all of this. And I'm so disappointed to see the rulemakers in Washington lumping everyone together. And I hope that's a trend that's going to stop, but I'm afraid it's not. I'm afraid we're going to see that all over the country.
Well, one of the
I'm afraid
reasons,
so too, and I think the crux of the problem is something that we were told by members of the Liquor Control Board at a public input meeting last month. here in Washington. A lot of the patients showed up for this meeting, of course, because we're very concerned about what is being done
Right.
to this community. And at that meeting, we were told by the Liquor Control Board that it is inconvenient to have two parallel side-by-side systems, that is the recreational and the medical
Inconvenient for
system
who?
distribution. Right, and we were also told that it would negatively impact profitability of the state stores under I-502 for patients to be able to go get untaxed medicine from dispensaries. Therefore, the dispensary system needed to be shut down. So basically, we were told for reasons of profit and convenience that the medical marijuana system is being shut down. And in my mind, those aren't good reasons.
No.
No, they're not.
No.
I think your mind is working correctly there. Let me ask a question, because January 1, this, am I right in January 1 their recommendations would become law? Because that's
The
when your program
legislature-
starts.
The legislature has a January session coming up, and what they're supposed to do is take those recommendations from the Liquor Control Board and work those into a new medical marijuana law.
Oh, wow.
Now, what they do with those recommendations, that's anybody's guess. They don't have to take them word for word. They can amend those. They can hopefully make them better for patients, but they could just rubber stamp what the Liquor Control
Right, which many
Unfortunately, that happens
legislatures
all the time,
do.
right?
We've seen it in
Yeah.
so
The
much
people
of our
that
history.
are the ones making the decisions, is there any medical marijuana patients involved in the decision making? Is there anyone that's representing the rights and of the medical marijuana patients? Anyone at all?
Only from the outside. And this is what is so distressing to me, is that when this group of policy specialists got together and brainstormed these recommendations, there wasn't a medical marijuana patient in the room.
Right.
There
Yeah,
wasn't
obviously.
a authorizing physician for medical marijuana patients in the room. It would seem to me that each of those groups needed to have someone there to keep these recommendations at least somewhat reality-based, rather than this absurd set of recommendations that they came up with.
Yep.
It's part of what we see, I think, endemically across all legislatures. Once we get into the government, the people that are they're actually making the decisions are not being informed by
By the people that it
cross-section.
impacts,
Yeah,
yes.
by the people that it
And
impacts.
they
Every
they
place we go, that's the issue, right? That the
is.
people are not in it, and government's not set up to accommodate us, right? Like they don't make it easy
Right.
to plug
They're
in.
not
You know,
like,
that
hey, who's being affected by this law? Let's call them all.
there's
in
no
and-
a little advance notice, whatever's required by law of these meetings. The process is closed. It's often very insular. If there's a committee meeting where they're going to debate this stuff, it happens at 11 a.m. on a weekday when people are at work or otherwise committed, and so the process of government isn't set up, and that's why I always encourage people to really be proactive in becoming an advocate and learning your skills
Right.
and figuring out how government works, because they're not going to help you do this.
Right.
You have to do it yourself. One thing that people can use if you're listening and thinking, I want to be more active, is go to our website. There's a free online training center on our website where you can get some very basic, some rudimentary skills in citizen advocacy, because, man, like lawyers, lobbyists, consultants, they're not going to solve this. It's going to be people.
Where will they find that? What's the website?
AmericansForSafeAccess.org.
And then is there a specific?
Click on the advocacy tab, and it's all right there. That's the kind of thing we're going to have to do in Washington and the other states, I think, to solve the problem like this, is that people are going to have to stand up and be vocal with their lawmakers, because ultimately the burden falls to lawmakers, right?
And Steve, you're so right that it seems to be in our cause for all the years that I've been in it. I've wished that organizations could work in concert together, but we have so many disparate organizations all trying very hard to do the right thing by their constituencies, but somehow we're not a unified voice in that.
You know where that
unification
unity can exist is with patients, with the patient community.
Absolutely, and it should exist.
And whatever lapel pin they wear, there can be that unity there.
Are
There
the
should be.
patients riled up, Steve? Is there a significant amount of people, saying, what the hell?
You know what? Before we find out about that, Steve, we're going to take a quick break. It's a great cliffhanger to leave our three listeners with. And when we come back, we'll answer the question of whether there's a good patient base there that's helping to push back on this. And hang with us for just a moment, Steve. And you at home, hang with us through this station identification.
Is that what's happening?
Yeah.
Okay.
Something like that.
Upcoming shows to the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Welcome to FYI. It's Dimitri Young here with Robert Fick. Hey everybody, welcome to Talking Marijuana.
Hi everybody, Crabman's Rock and Roll Revival featuring Frazier Smith is on the air, in your hair, and going out everywhere around the world.
I'm Gary Garver, live from the John Lovitz Comedy Club.
This is the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Hi, John Lovitz here. It's time to put laughter back into your life. Check out the John Lovitz Comedy Club, located in the heart of Universal Studios City Walk, Los Angeles, not Orlando. For tickets, go to thejohnlovitzcomedyclub.com.
You are listening to the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
And we are back with our guest Steve Elliott in Washington via Skype. He is an advocate for medical marijuana patients in Washington and is fighting the state liquor board, which is recommending that the medical marijuana program in Washington be folded into the legalization program, thereby losing many rights for patients.
I think it's ridiculous that the liquor board is put in charge of this anyway. It's like getting a football ref to call a basketball game.
Right. In a sense, I mean, this is what the grand experiment is about. We've now got Colorado and Washington on the map as the first legal states, and the rest of the country is looking to them. And you Steve, you in Washington are regulated in a very different way than Colorado is about to be regulated, and probably different than the next 2 or 3 states that come on board.
But I would say this about legalization advocates who are pushing the national agenda to legalize marijuana. They should pay very close attention to what's happening in Washington, because a worst-case PR scenario is for legalization to roll out and be perceived as an opposition to medical cannabis or in conflict. That's going to be a disaster for the messaging around legalization, and that's not anything anybody wants to create. But if patients in Washington cannot get their medicine, they wind up in trouble with the law. If their rights are trampled on, that's the scenario we're setting up. And so if you're pro-legalization and you want to push that agenda, you better take care of medical.
Well, I think the difference between them has to be made clear to most everybody, because I think that the general public just thinks that legalization will solve all the medical problems.
Well, you know, there are many people in our community, in our camp, who did look at medical marijuana and do look at medical marijuana as a stepping stone.
Yeah.
And they need to get over that. They need to stop thinking about that. It's not a means to an end.
It's not a means to an end. It doesn't need to be anymore.
That belief influences policy, and it influences what we tolerate as policy. And so we need people to stand up and say, you know what, I'm for legalization, but I'm also for medical. And it's not the same thing.
How can the board's recommendation trump a law from 1998?
What law is that?
Well,
the law that you can grow your own.
Well, Steve, is it the case in Washington that legislature can amend a voter initiative? Is that the is that how it works there?
They're not supposed to amend a voter initiative for 2 years, but medical marijuana law, since it was passed back in 1998, it's sort of open season on it. So 502 is the new kid on the block with general legalization, and by means of implementing I-502, they're going after medical, which was passed a long time ago, and
that's different from California.
They can pretty much do anything they want to medical at this point, since it's the old law.
Yeah. So do you have support? I mean, is there patient support?
So before the break, we were talking about patient support in Washington. You've told us about some organizations and some advocates that are working. Do they have a base of support with the patients? Like the meeting that you said you went to last month, was there a fairly good showing of patients? And that seems to be the way to influence our government, is to show up with a number of people that are advocating for common sense.
Absolutely, the patient community is more concerned and more unified than I've ever seen it.
Oh, good. That's great.
That room where the meeting was held, and by the way, you guys are right that the governmental process, the public input process, often isn't that friendly to actually receiving any public input. There was only one meeting statewide for patient input on these recommendations.
Wow.
It was held on a weeknight, on a Thursday night. And of course, this is a big state, and patients over, say, in the eastern half of the state really didn't have any practical chance of attending if they had to go to work the next day.
Sure.
But in any event, this room was built to hold about 450 people, and it was crammed with 600 very
Fantastic.
energized patients.
That's good. That's
A
good.
lot of people got up there and let the board know that these recommendations are a bad idea, that you shouldn't take the right to grow away from poor people, from sick people who can't afford these high state store prices, and that you shouldn't lower these limits. You shouldn't stop the ability to add new conditions to authorizing conditions. We gave them our feedback. The question is, were they listening? Are they going?
Well, we've reported here, if I'm not mistaken, that the day after that particular
they made
meeting,
announcements.
they came out with an announcement that wasn't announced at the meeting where input would have been valuable, that
Regarding the
over
pesticides.
300
Yeah, the
pesticides are
pesticides.
going to be legal to put into the marijuana, which should concern patients as well.
I can only imagine that they waited until the day after that meeting, because they would have heard plenty about those pesticides.
Oh my
And a
God.
lynching.
There might have been a lynching.
Many of us, of course, have compromised immune system or compromised liver function.
Exactly.
Or both. And it is such a bad idea to be ingesting all these pesticides with our medicine. I mean, how bad
Another
an
reason
idea-
for patients to be able to grow it on their own, so that they
Exactly,
know
so
what's
you know it's
clean,
in
yeah.
their medicine and how it's being grown.
Yeah, very personally, I'm a patient. I'm a liver transplant recipient. I'm a two-time cancer survivor. The amount of marijuana that I have to ingest in a day, and the fact that there's 300 types of pesticides, it could be in the medicine in Washington. I couldn't even go visit at this point. That's how I'm looking at it.
It's
I
just
can't even
crazy.
visit Washington.
The fact that they can at the same time say, look, we're going to allow them to put hundreds of pesticides on your medicine, but you're not allowed to grow your own to avoid these pesticides, it's just cruel.
It's unbelievable. Yeah.
Ridiculous.
So to take the temperature a little bit of what's going on, again, January 1st, I believe these rules are supposed to become somewhat law. You said in January they have a session to sort of fade out the medical marijuana or discuss that and how to implement it in. How do you see this playing out? Do you feel like you have a good shot at influencing them to maybe just adjust? It seems to me in our history of going up against government that the best you could hope for is a little cutback on their side, that they understand the issue and they tweak
They
a word or two
compromise it.
here to allow for some of what seems to be the better legislation, but they really never give a complete reversal. So what kind of pulse do you get at this point, a month before this goes in? Do you feel like you might gain some ground here for patients?
My understanding is that we have a chance, we have a fighting chance to save home grow for patients.
That would be good. That would be big.
I think,
That would
the
be-
key in this is that politicians can be intimidated by voters. And I hope that's, and I don't mean intimidated in a bad way. They just
Right.
need to know that
Influenced.
voters in their district, the people who are going to reelect them, are not on board. And I've seen that sway votes before, both on the city, state, and federal level. But they need to hear from people in the district. And so I hope in Washington State that whether it be through Health Before Happy Hour, which is also at AmericansForSafeAccess.org, or through the other organizations or campaigns, that people are getting active and actually talking to the lawmakers. It's one of the mistakes we make in this movement, as we all know here in Los Angeles and all over the country, is we talk to each other too much.
Yeah.
It's like we
You
all
have to talk to
reinforce our
everybody
things and we
else,
talk
yeah.
to each other and we haggle with each other and argue. Talk to the lawmakers. Don't waste your time debating
So
minutia with your friends. Go out and talk to your lawmakers.
In Washington, the commission, that's everybody's lobbying the commission, this commission that supposedly came up with all the
liquor board.
liquor
The
board,
state
the
liquor board.
commission. So can you lobby your representative as well, your elected official that represents your, district? I mean, can you lobby them and they have like the power to influence the commission in any way?
Yes, we absolutely can. Since the Liquor Control Board will be turning their recommendations over to the legislature, what we can do is to contact our individual lawmakers and tell them, look, these recommendations are a bad idea. These patient rights to grow and to possess need to be left alone. And hopefully, when they take up the recommendations, they can amend them accordingly. There are also, on January 14th and 15th, patients and patient groups are getting together to organize 2 lobby days.
Great.
Where
Good.
a lot of the patients are going down to Olympia, the state capital.
Oh,
and
that's
That's
huge.
good.
That's huge, Steve.
face to face
Absolutely.
with legislators. We're going to give them faces that they can think about rather than just numbers and statistics.
That's the
good.
best way to do it. It really is.
I've been a part of a lot of those, and they're really empowering, and they can be very effective. So good work with that. That's great.
And good luck with that. I really hope that we see the patients victorious in
And
this.
I want you
in
to
this
know
fight.
that ASA is ready to do whatever we can. Obviously, we're not the biggest organization in the country, but we want to help. Did you have a chance to meet Steph Scher when she was there in Washington State, our executive director?
I didn't get to meet Steph, but I would love to do that if I get a
Well,
chance.
she'll be back on the West Coast soon, and we're going to try to make that happen.
I'd love that.
Yeah. Can you, Don, talk a little bit about the program that you've mentioned a couple times? It's a great
will,
name.
And I want to be honest with you. I'm not front lines in Washington State
Right.
because I'm busy here in California.
yeah.
So I'm not the best spokesperson.
Health
but
before-
the campaign is called Health Before Happy Hour. The idea is that we've got to take care of medical cannabis patients before we are going to strike out on a limb and legalize pot for everyone to smoke.
Right.
And by the way, ASA does not oppose legalization. It's just not our priority. In fact, it's not even on our radar. We're
Absolutely.
here for patients. We were founded by
Absolutely.
patients for patients, and so our Health Before Happy Hour campaign, which was created in Washington to respond to what's happening there, is applicable to the other states because you're seeing less of this in Colorado, but it's happening in Colorado and in Arizona and New Mexico. We're seeing restrictions and developments around non-medical cannabis proposals that are pushing back on patients' rights, and so we're prepared to roll out this campaign in other states too. And basically, the idea here is that we're going to get constituents into lawmakers' offices and tell them. Medical is not disposable. Medical is not a stepping stone, and we want to reinforce that message. And that's the
Right.
goal of that campaign: is to get folks into offices.
It seems like that was always the unspoken and sometimes spoken thing about medical marijuana was that it was the stepping stone that people wanted
Right.
it
Right.
to get in. And you were right. There are people
If
that
you believe
want that.
you need to update your thinking.
There are no
You need to update your
footprints on
thinking.
my
And by all
back.
means, go off and legalize marijuana. Go do it. It's a
Yeah,
noble
yeah.
calling, but don't step on the patients while you do it.
How's medical in Colorado doing?
It's a funny mix. Do we have time? Or are we going to go to break?
You know what? Let's do go to break,
All right,
and we'll
let's-
talk. We'll come back. We'll start to broaden the conversation out to the country, but keep on the same topic of
Sure.
medical versus legalization. And we'll see you on the other side of this break.
Smoke them if you got it.
This is the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Upcoming shows to the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Welcome to FYI. It's Dimitri Young here with Robert Fick. Hey, everybody, welcome to Talking Marijuana.
Hi, everybody. Crabman's Rock and Roll Revival featuring Frazier Smith is on the air, in your hair, and going out everywhere around the world.
I'm Gary Garver, live from the John Lovitz Comedy Club.
This is the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Hi, John Lovitz here. It's time to put laughter back into your life. Check out the John Lovitz Comedy Club, located in the heart of Universal Studios City Walk, Los Angeles, not Orlando. For tickets, go to thejohnlovitzcomedyclub.com.
You are listening to the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
And we are back from our break. We are with our guest, Steve Elliott from Washington, an advocate from Washington working to protect patient rights in the light of the new legalization that is taking place there. And during the break, just as a quick side note, during the break we found out that here at the beautiful John Lovitz studio that we're in, we love recording out of here. We're at Universal City, the John Lovitz Comedy Club, and he has a great studio here to do podcasting, and we're so happy to be here. But we were informed at the break that the Christmas party that is starting to go on downstairs and outside of our studio is for the DEA, and we should be very quiet when we slip out of here. And I said, I'm only drinking legal coffee, so it doesn't really
See,
matter.
if I had known, I would have brought cookies.
How
I
wonderful.
know. We could
We're
have
just
offered
going to
them
leave some
cookies.
pastries and walk out the door.
Just a few edibles for your party. Have a great time.
Small
They're
world, small
red,
world.
white, and blue frosting on the top.
That's some
they'll be-
crazy.
I wonder how many
crazy.
of them are listeners. Do they tune us
Oh,
in?
that'd have been interesting.
Our listeners should just stay with us because the DEA cannot get a hold of you today. Not today.
They don't know who's watching.
So when might this all go into effect in Washington? If, let's say, nothing happens. Let's say that the legislature in January takes up their recommendations, and or they don't take up their recommendations and they change a few things. When do we actually have legal marijuana opening up in Washington?
As far as the retail stores themselves, according to the most optimistic projections I've seen, none of those will be opening before about June at the earliest.
Wow.
So it's a long
What
time.
about the patients?
Yeah, what do patients do between January and June?
Right.
If the legislature decides to accept the Liquor Control Board's recommendations to shut down the dispensary system and home grows, most people believe that they won't be willing to take the enormous PR black eye that they will be taking if there is a gap in access between the dispensaries closing and the state stores opening.
Well, we hope so.
So the
Yeah.
belief is that they will allow the dispensaries and home grows to continue until around June when the state stores open, at which point everything will be shut down.
Wow.
If they take the
You
recommendation.
guys sure have a big job to do in Washington, boy. The patients really have to push back on this. This is incredibly cruel and not fair to the patients.
No, the state stores are completely owned and run by the state, and they keep all the profits. There's no private ownership of any of those facilities.
They are state licensed facilities. Now, there will be private people who are right now in the process of applying for the licenses to run these stores, but they will be roughly comparable to state stores that sold liquor before. The Liquor Control Board, during the last election before this one, was divested of its authority to sell liquor in this state. Voters in Washington state basically fired the Liquor Control Board from selling liquor. Wow. So these folks were about to be out of a job until marijuana was turned over to
You know, there's historical precedent for that in the whole prohibition of marijuana, because
Exactly.
obviously alcohol was legal again, and there were a lot of cops who needed work.
And Singler,
Wow.
especially, right?
Yeah. The Bureau of Narcotics was, they needed something to do.
And liquor was legal again, so they picked
So this
marijuana.
legislation in Washington has less to do with allowing for legal and medical cannabis than it has to do with money, politics,
And jobs.
And jobs.
Precisely. And Don made a great, I believe it was Don made a great point just a little bit earlier, in that the fact that this legalization law is flawed and is seen as causing problems for patients is very, very unfortunate because, of course, for purposes of justice and having a free society, we need legalization coast to coast. Now, for legalization to be perceived as a negative for patients, that's just incredibly unfortunate.
It is.
That would be
It's
terrible
unfortunate
baggage, would it
this is
not?
being
Yeah.
blocked.
It is, but if I was a patient living in the state of Washington, I would have fought legalization, and I'd be fighting it right now.
I think they were tricked, though. A lot of patients supported 502 because they thought it was going to be okay.
Yes.
But something we also need to think about, or people who are going to campaign on legalization need to be aware of, is that there's always a backlash in politics, and I think there are a lot of people thinking that the legalization steamroller has started downhill. There's no stopping it now. And I was just talking with some of the old timers. I shouldn't use that term. Some of my senior activist friends who were reminding me of 1979, and they said, "You can't imagine what it was like in 1979. We assumed pot was going to be legal, and Congress was going to vote to legalize it. It was considered a done deal. Nobody was thinking we could lose in 1979. And that reminds me of the sentiment, this sort of irrational exuberance I feel right now around the country of thinking every state's going to do it, every state with initiative will do it, legislatures will do it. We're almost there. We're at the tipping point, and you have to be really careful. You got to watch your flanks, because what I'm afraid of is the backlash. And people are saying, 2016, it's all over. By 2016, we could be hip deep in an anti-marijuana movement in this country.
Certainly an
that's pushing
anti-medical
back.
marijuana movement.
Well, you know what is going to fuel the flames of a backlash is if people look at medical marijuana and say, "I knew it. It was all a scam.
Yeah.
Right.
It was all a trick," and that's going to help fuel that backlash.
Well, that's
And so
one of the
I
main
hope people are being
reasons for
aware of this.
keeping them
That's outside
separate.
my field of work.
Right.
But they need to be aware of the fact that as we push towards legalization, every step we make, the pendulum gets ready to swing back, and we've seen it before. 1979, it looked like pot was practically legal in 1979. By 1980, 81, 82, we were in the absolute darkest days of the drug war. So, we have to be careful.
Yeah.
It's not always forward progress.
What was it that made the difference in
Parents.
79?
Parents were getting up in arms.
their children.
And the guys I talked to about this, I won't say names on the air because I don't have permission, but some of the older activists who were very active in the 70s in some of the national organizations said nobody on our side considered angry parents to be a viable constituency to influence national politics. And guess what was coming up behind us? Mothers Against Drunk Driving, anti-marijuana group, I forget their name. They were all coming up, and all they needed was the lightning flash that would ignite their movement. And what happened in 1979 in November? Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the Republican Revolution, or whatever he called it back then, was underway, and family values were in, and drugs were out, and marijuana just got rolled over. Just say no. Just rolled over.
But on the other hand, the parents of the children that have autism and all the other things, they can roll this thing back.
They are
because they're the
this
parents.
era's,
Exactly,
angry parent.
Yeah.
And they're angry at the states.
No, see, it could go our way. Like
Yes.
when it comes to tipping points and all of that, we control that. We can do that. But I want to caution people who think that 502 is the medicine that Washington needs to get over medical and move on with legalization. They're playing with fire.
Yes, they
They're
are.
playing with fire. It could blow up in their faces.
On this issue, there was some news out of New Jersey this week where it speaks exactly to this. Chris Christie has there's been an attempt to put legislation forth that would. You spoke a little bit about this, Steve, that would increase the number of symptoms, ailments that medical marijuana would be legal to treat with.
Yes.
And Chris Christie just got up on his high horse and said, you know what? No, unfortunately I don't have my access to the articles, but basically what he said was, this is exactly what I'm governor. We're not going to. They want legalization. These advocates want legalization, and they're not getting that under my governorship. Mm-hmm. And I don't care what goes on with medical marijuana. We're done.
Mm-hmm. Enough is enough, and that's it.
So, I mean, completely not taking into consideration constituents. The reason this legislation was coming up in New Jersey was because of the parents. Once again, we get back to parents who brought forth the only change that's been made in New Jersey's medical marijuana law, and that is to allow for the oral concentration for children. Right. And so here they wanted to add something that said that there was reciprocity in their in their program with other states that have legal marijuana, and Chris Christie said, no.
Yeah,
we can't have reciprocity. They just want legal marijuana. No, they don't want legal marijuana. Right. They know that in Colorado, there is a strain of marijuana that many parents are actually moving to Colorado to get.
They're going to have to manufacture New Jersey. That's the end of that debate, is that until federal law changes, we can't move cannabis from Colorado to New Jersey
But there
legally.
are 9 states that allow for reciprocity now in their medical marijuana.
That means under state law, you won't get busted.
That means under state law.
But I don't want to go off on a tangent.
We're going to have to deal with this.
But folks in New Jersey need to be making CBD medicine in New Jersey.
Absolutely, and one
Not
of the
if
reasons,
the governor's going to say no to the whole idea, though.
Well, they need to make it anyway because the kids need the medicine.
right?
So
and the governor says one of the
if
things.
we all waited for permission.
So one of the things Chris Christie
sometimes
said
it's easier to
was.
ask for forgiveness.
Yes.
Right?
One of the things Chris Christie said was that there's not even patients signing up for this stuff. Why should I be expanding the law? And then the patient advocates are saying, well, why should we as patients pay a $200 fee to sign up for this program, pay doctors expensive fees, and then we don't have access to the medicine that we need? We don't have that kind of extra money to pay for a system that basically isn't serving our needs as medical patients. And so it's very complicated. Steve, as we come on board all over the country now, and as medical marijuana has shown for the last 15 years, the complications, once you do get it into the legislature, once you do start to make laws about it, you're getting all these complications that because of ignorance on the lawmaker's side as to how it really is, how it works, how it's dispensed, these laws have become a double-edged sword for,
cuts both ways.
And the good news is, and maybe this is segueing us on to other topics, but the good news is cannabis is becoming mainstream. And so the more mainstream it becomes, the more people are going to understand it, and they're going to treat it like medicine. And that's the key, is that we need medical cannabis treated like medicine, not like alcohol, not like a vice. It needs to be treated like medicine. And we're having that debate in Sacramento right now. I'm on my way tomorrow. I have 8 meetings over 3 days, and they're all going to say to me, oh, let's put this in ABC, the Alcoholic Beverage Commission. I have to say to them, no, look at Washington. It's not working in Washington. It won't work here. But we're becoming mainstream. And something exciting that's happening today while we're recording this, the press releases are going out that the American Herbal Pharmacopoeia has just published the first modern monograph on cannabis. That's a scientific description of the cannabis plant.
And the American Pharmacopoeia.
American Herbal Pharmacopoeia is an organization that, in conjunction with the American Herbal Products Association, is sort of fighting the good fight for herbal medicine, for complementary and alternative medicines, herbal medicines. They're sort of the Americans for safe access for herbal medicine.
Okay.
They're the ones who've been keeping the FDA off of herbal medicine and saying, no, we can regulate this ourselves. We don't want you to clamp down and crack down, because herbal medicines are different. And so they're really embracing cannabis, and they're sort of today taking cannabis back out of the shadows and putting it back on the shelf with herbal medicine and with the huge movement for complementary and alternative medicine. 40% of Americans are involved in some way in using complementary or alternative medicines, and so they're putting cannabis back where it was in 1937 on the pharmacy shelf as an herbal tincture and a medicine. I'm really excited about it.
That's great.
It's kind of wonky, I know.
It sounds like a great organization.
They published a scientific paper, but I'm really proud to say, first of all, that ASA helped fund this. We got the seed money to get this thing going back in the day. It took 2 years to finally get this thing published. But also, I'm really proud to say that the writers and reviewers of this monograph are just a who's who of scientific cannabis research, including Dr. El Soleil from the University of Mississippi, who, as you know, is the only legal marijuana grower under federal law in the country. And while I don't always see eye to eye with the policy decisions that Dr. El Soleil supports, he's, of course, been very prominent in this, and that's great, because he's bringing the establishment with him. But I'm also really proud of the fact that our executive director, Steph Scher, is also on the board of reviewers and editors on this. So it's I feel good.
Mainstream.
Dr. Jehan Marcoux, as you know, who's on our medical and scientific advisory board, is on there. So just really a great group of people did this, and it's putting cannabis in the scientific world right where it belongs, with herbal medicine.
With herbal medicine.
We're going to use that as a tool when we talk to these lawmakers, and they're saying, oh, alcohol board, liquor license, and all of that. We're going to say, no, look, AHP says this is herbal medicine, and it's they've got the scientific data to back it up.
Yeah, that seems to be really the place where marijuana belongs.
Should be.
Absolutely.
Because
it doesn't work like a prescription drug.
It doesn't, because, we know as marijuana users, there are so many strains. They work so independently and differently within, even the same strain would work differently in our body types around this table for us.
And different harvests, different impacts, because plants change.
So the people that should be regulating that are not the FDA, who demand that it be this way every time you make it. This is how we
In herbal medicine, it's not like that, right? Because in echinacea, the plant changes. St. John's wort, the plant changes, and your body changes. So in herbal medicine, it's based on the patient's feedback, on the biofeedback from the patient. That's how you determine dosage. That's where I really want to go. And I'm really excited about it. It's boring, it's wonky, it's technical. It's a really big milestone in the movement for medical cannabis.
And we'll talk more about that as it progresses, for sure. Let's take another break, our final break for today, and we'll come back with Steve and kind of, again, go around the horn, go around the country. Maybe I can get my articles back here, and just a few other topics that we want to talk about, and we'll get your input on that, Steve, as well. So hold on for just a minute. We'll be back.
You are listening to the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Upcoming shows to the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Welcome to FYI. It's Dimitri Young here with Robert Fick. Hey everybody, welcome to Talking Marijuana.
Hi everybody, Crabman's Rock and Roll Revival featuring Frazier Smith is on the air, in your hair, and going out everywhere around the world.
I'm Gary Garver, live from the John Lovitz Comedy Club.
This is the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Hi, John Lovitz here. It's time to put laughter back into your life. Check out the John Lovitz Comedy Club, located in the heart of Universal Studios City Walk, Los Angeles, not Orlando. For tickets, go to thejohnlovitzcomedyclub.com.
You are listening to the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Hey, hi, we're back. We're back for our final segment. We're your hosts. I'm Barry Kramer.
And I'm Yamilet Bolaños.
I'm Don Duncan from Americans for Safe Access.
Dan Gabriel.
And with us in Washington is Steve Elliott of tokesignals.com. Go on to that site and check out what's going on. And Steve, we were talking to you in the break about Colorado and its implementation, and you were pointing out a major difference that was going on with Colorado and Washington. So why don't you elaborate on that a little bit?
Right. I've been pleased to see that Colorado has been including the medical marijuana community by way of letting medical marijuana dispensary operators become the first license holders for recreational marijuana in Colorado. They already have the expertise and the knowledge of how to dispense cannabis. And it seems that makes a lot more sense than the way they're doing it here in Washington, where medical marijuana dispensary operators are basically being frozen out of the process, and new people who haven't actually ever dispensed any cannabis are apparently going to be the majority of the license holders.
So
you know, the cynical side of me says, wow, it really matters who your lobbyists are, right?
Yeah, no kidding.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's
and
true.
A great thing about the Colorado system of having it go through the medical operators is that medical isn't going to get lost.
Well, you hope. Now, let's be cautious here, because just because somebody operates a medical marijuana dispensary doesn't mean they have an enlightened worldview necessarily. So what this is an advantage for the medical operators, and we hope that will carry over to goodwill and sound policy. And I think it will, but that I don't think patients in Colorado should be complacent, thinking, oh, the dispensary operators are going to get first shot at this, because that may go well and it may not.
Right.
So it still involves that patient participation.
It's got a better chance.
It does have a better chance.
chance.
I just don't want patients to think, oh, we're cool in Colorado. Because you've got to be vigilant with these guys. Always vigilant.
I've lost all my articles, so I can't credit who's writing about this. But I know in Colorado, one of the things I read was that they're having about 100 and so licenses that will be given out to sell legally. And it looks like starting in January in Colorado, when this program is supposed to begin, that maybe only 5, possibly 10 licenses will have been given out. And in reading the article a little bit more, we see that basically they're still a little hesitant about implementing this program, and what's holding it up is the bureaucracy of government. They're not giving these licenses to people in a timely manner. They're really stretching the process out.
Which makes it very expensive, because you're paying rent the whole time.
Very expensive. So that's one of the problems in Colorado.
What else is going on in Colorado, and this is happening in other states where local government have authority to opt out or to restrict medical cannabis, and now cannabis legalization, is like Colorado has a wet and dry thing going on. The big cities, the urban centers, have medical cannabis. The rural areas don't really have access because they don't want it, and they've been banning it because they're politically speaking, they're not as liberal and as tolerant as, say, in Denver, right? And then some of your more touristy locations don't want it because they don't want tourists to be offended or whatever by cannabis. And so we're going to see, I think, a separating in states where it's allowed. Some local governments are going to dig in their heels and say no. And I'm really encouraged to see up in Oregon that the courts there seem to be siding with the medical cannabis people and saying, no, local government, you can't. Whereas here in California, the courts are siding with the local governments and saying, yeah, ban it, roll it all back.
Ban it there, it's all good.
So these states are going to move in different paths depending on that. I don't think all of Colorado will be a legalization state. I think big cities will be a legalization state.
Dark places.
It's going to green places and not green places, but I don't know.
But as we, these are great experiments. Washington, Colorado, all the medical marijuana states that have come on board. It's still in the experimental stage. We don't have federal law governing this, as in a blanket way. And we're still experimenting with everything. And what I noticed in Colorado, even before it becomes legal, they're doing some tweaking and trying to understand what the full impact of legalization is going to mean and how to deal with it in local governments.
They're twerking in Colorado?
They're
is that what you said?
twerking. Yeah.
Tweaking.
Everyone in Colorado is doing the twerk. And one of the things I saw was that the Denver City Council has reversed, or they were in the process of reversing one of the things that prohibited marijuana smoking,
in public.
and that was smoking on your front porch. They said that was not going to be allowed in Denver, and the local government, the local city, at the 11th hour, finally said, some people, smart people, said, you know what? We don't have the manpower nor the money to service complaints from people saying, "Oh, my neighbor is smoking marijuana."
That's very practical.
They're gonna have to, it is a very practical.
But it's also like, it's your porch. You should get to smoke marijuana on your porch. I mean,
absolutely.
come on.
If you're going to legalize this thing,
And if you want to keep it off the streets, well, guess what's off the street? The porch.
Your porch.
Right.
Porch, yeah.
And so basically, that was one thing that was going on in Denver. Another thing that was going on in Denver, I believe, was that the mayor is not so. He never was a
pro
supporter, and he's kind of holding back implementation a little bit here and there, and it's like, it's a losing battle already.
He's like, okay, your porch, but not your steps.
Right.
Well, he wanted no public
No, are we talking
smoking
elevated
at all,
porches?
So
Yeah.
one of the things, again, just to tie this up into a broader conversation, Steve, is that here in Los Angeles, we have voted for local legislation in May of this year. We voted and it was passed. It took quite a bit of money, about $1.5 million to mount the campaign to get what was called Measure D passed here in Los Angeles, Proposition D. And here we are, we're coming up on January, and it is still not being implemented as law. There were supposed to be 135 dispensaries. Now, practically, that would be very difficult to do, take it down from the 1,000+ dispensaries to 135 in a short period of time. But what we've seen is not a great support from the local government to back a law that was passed by a majority of the people of this city, as your law was passed by a majority of people in Washington, as Colorado's law was passed by a majority of people. The legislatures are not really listening to the constituents. They're still hung up on their ideology.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's
Well,
very
and-
true.
And there's
Here in
not as
LA.
much money in closing them down.
No, of course not.
We have to be careful who we elect, right?
Who we elect, absolutely.
And that has to do with participating in that process, participating in it.
Craziness.
If I might interject, being careful about who we elect. Good news out of California. You guys saw this. Robert Jacob has just been elected as the new mayor of the city of Sebastopol.
Yay,
Yes,
Robert.
and
We're
he's a
so
dispensary
proud of
owner.
him. He owns two
He owns two
dispensaries.
and he's just
Yeah.
elected mayor. Sebastopol, if you don't know, is a
Marin.
rural community up in Northern California, very cannabis friendly. And Robert was elected to city council several years back, and having navigated the permitting process for medical marijuana, he's like, man, we can do better. And so he ran for city council and was elected, and was just elected by his colleagues on the city council as the mayor of the city of Sebastopol.
Man,
so how do
we
you like
can
that
do
for
better.
mainstreaming
Yeah,
medical cannabis?
that's great.
But we have a mayor.
Congratulations, Robert.
And that's awesome, but he's in Sebastopol. It's their
Hey, it's their
Hey,
first
it's the
step.
first step.
Yeah,
it's
no.
the first
You
step.
haven't
We
elected
have
mayor
to
of
plot
anything
on
else.
those
That's
things,
true.
you know.
And truthfully,
I'm
the
just saying.
lesson learned out of that is, get involved. Get
Get
involved
involved.
in your local government. Here in Los Angeles, many dispensary operators have gotten involved to try to
Shape it.
regulate and shape it so that it's correct for patient use, for patient advantage, and patients have gotten involved. And
the
when
media
you
really
get
picked up
involved, you
this
can
thing,
become mayor of your city. So
Stories all over the country about the pot mayor in California.
Yes, all
absolutely,
over the country.
congratulations
Yeah.
to him.
And a good guy, too. He's a
And
decent
Robert's a
fellow.
wonderful guy. Yeah, he's really nice. He couldn't happen to a nicer person.
Yeah,
you know?
that's really nice. In Colorado, in Larimer County, I have a report that marijuana arrests have plummeted 65%. Now that is nothing to sneeze at. 65% since legalization.
Wow,
So that
okay.
is one county of Colorado, but they have said that all those arrests that they used to do obviously were, for possession, minor.
Could have been big time, right?
So
Yeah.
minor, and they said now they just don't have the funding again, or the time, or the resources.
And also,
to,
those people aren't breaking the law anymore.
to
So
not
that's awesome.
go after the main guys. You have to go after the main people that are definitely taking our laws that we've fought very hard for and abusing those laws, and we want them stopped as much as anybody
So
else.
do we,
But
yes.
you gotta. We got to do it in a legal way.
Well, that's good news.
Yeah, that was good news. Some interesting news on the offing is that the DEA is targeting BHO. I don't know how many of you have heard about this, but they are proposing a new drug code for marijuana concentrates exclusively. I think the explosion of BHO.
What does BHO mean for our one
BHO
listener
is
who doesn't know?
butane hash oil.
Yes, BHO.
So it's combined with butane, and so anything that
it's frankly not the best way to
any
smoke cannabis,
concentrate that contains cannabis, sativa, marijuana, I forget the exact wording of it. Any concentrate they would like to have under this Schedule 1 as a specific thing.
It's very frustrating because there's danger in BHO. It's dangerous to manufacture, and if it's not produced right, it's not the healthiest stuff in the world. But this isn't a public safety measure. It's masquerading as public safety, but this is just another tool to beat cannabis consumers over the head with.
Exactly.
Wait, I don't get it. What exactly are they? Only
new
butane?
they're basically
Only the
creating
butane oils and the regular oils are okay, or?
No, it's confusing, but what they're trying to really do is make a new separate category for extracts alone that will allow them to go after mostly the manufacturers, because it's being manufactured so sloppily around the country, and it's another way for them to
arrest people.
Exactly, another tool.
Yeah. If only there was a DEA party going on, we could
talk. Let's go. We're going to go downstairs and tell those guys what we think.
So we have a few minutes left.
Does anyone have a joint to share?
One of the things we like to do with our last few minutes of each show is to bring up a dope of the week.
Yes.
I don't think we had one the last time we were
didn't
on.
have one.
We ran out of time.
But boy, we found just a choice candidate this week. I forget where she's out of. Georgia. She's out of Georgia. Oh, and quickly before I
don't get me started on Georgia.
Quickly before I talk about our dope of the week, today is Tuesday, and today in Uruguay they are voting.
Legalizing.
They will be
legalization.
most likely right now. They're becoming the first
hot new vacation spot, Uruguay.
country to legalize marijuana. That's a great side note, and we'll get more into that on other shows. So, our dope of the week is a Wendy's employee from Georgia. She gave out a hamburger meal at the call-in at the takeout.
Wendy's.
Yeah, and when the person got home with their hamburger and bit into their hamburger, they had to call 911. They were feeling sick. There was a blunt, the remainders of a blunt, left in the burger. So we find out, it came up, yay. The customer met with police at Wendy's location where she ordered the burger, and the cops claim that the woman who gave it, the worker there, immediately admitted that the blunt was hers. And she's just as dopey as you back. According to the police,
what a stoner,
she said that she'd been smoking pot on the job and conveniently misplaced the blunt inside the customer's burger, right on top of the pickle. The blunt was taken as evidence. Sieber was arrested for possession, and she was also fired.
She was immediately fired.
The writer of this, and this was nobody even
did
credits
the
themselves.
customer then the customer did not order the blunt?
No,
that was extra.
Because,
they didn't even charge her extra for the blunt, and she claimed to get nauseous and sick,
so the blunt was
food poisoning.
The employee misunderstood the term Happy Meal.
A whole new meaning to Happy Meal. They spoke to the customers, who says she experienced food poisoning type symptoms after the incident, and she had to be hospitalized. Now, she never took a bite of the blunt.
She's going to be
she
a
just
runner-up.
found the blunt.
Yeah,
she is a runner-up for dope of the week.
Yeah, she's a runner-up for sure.
So far, Wendy's has offered to pay her medical bills, and they've even generously thrown in a $50 gift certificate to Wendy's.
So she can get some more free hamburgers for shitting.
So obviously sales are spiking at Wendy's all over the country.
Right? Everybody's going around there. They're wondering, did I get the lucky Willy Wonka the golden ticket?
Pickles.
Or not.
So, Steve, obviously we've digressed from our incredible conversation with you. Thank you so much for coming on today and talking to us and telling us what's going on in Washington. We're going to keep a keen eye out and see what's happening, and hopefully we can have you back to talk about future developments.
Do you have any last thoughts to your people, your patients in Washington, your co-advocates?
It's important that patients and advocates here in Washington let the legislature know that these recommendations are unacceptable, and we are going to have lobby days in Olympia on January 14th and 15th for any patients who care to join us at the state capitol.
And how can people get involved in the lobby days? Would they find a link to that somehow on tokesignals.com, your website that you write for?
Yes, they can. And there is also a Facebook group, Patient Lobby Days in Olympia.
Okay, good.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you once
you.
again for joining us today. We really enjoyed the conversation with you, and thanks to our hosts. And we will be back next week for another episode.
Pura vida.
Pura vida.
You are listening to the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Upcoming shows to the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Welcome to FYI. It's Dimitri Young here with Robert Fick. Hey everybody, welcome to Talking Marijuana.
Hi everybody, Crabman's Rock and Roll Revival featuring Frazier Smith is on the air, in your hair, and going out everywhere around the world.
I'm Gary Garver, live from the John Lovitz Comedy Club.
This is the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.